So we started this series, as you may recall, looking at really defining your level of interest in joining a board or in volunteering and what that might look like, and some of the things to think about for your own personal reflection of getting involved. Then in our second series, you may recall, if you weren't here or you were able to watch the replay of that, we dove a little deeper into really understanding what is the role of a board member, what does the board do, what is the purpose of the board, just to give you a bit more background in the work of governance and truly what that entails. And then today, as a part of our last series, our last piece in the whole series is now, assuming you've decided I definitely want to do this, I understand what's entailed, here are now the things that allow you to go out, the questions you should be asking as you start to interview and vet the organizations you want to join. So before you, if you've gotten that invitation or you're thinking about joining, here are some of the things now for you to be thinking about and be asking questions of the organization itself. So this really is an opportunity to kind of closes out the series for us and will arm you. There are a list of questions we're going to go through and scenarios that you just want to be aware of as you make this evaluation. And then we're going to email this deck to you so you'll have the questions in hand as well. Okay? Is anybody right now, by chance, at this stage at all? Have you looked at a board yet? Are you thinking about joining a board? Yeah? Please chime in at any point with your own experience or additional questions. Okay? So definitely, again, you've been offered a position, let's say, and it's time for you to now interview them. Really, some of the first questions you want to think about and be looking at is really understanding, making sure that you do understand the organization's mission, their programs, and really get a handle on the fiscal and programmatic health of the organization. So some of these questions are things such as making sure do the programs really relate to the mission? Are there evaluation pieces in place? This also can help you get a better understanding of how relevant they are within the community and that they truly are providing an impactful community need. I think a big question here is understanding if the board is involved with the budget process, and are they one of those entities, or hopefully the final entity, to approve that budget. Why would that be important, do you think?
That's how you can make a difference. See where money's being spent.
And because, again, as the board member, you are ultimately responsible for that budget. Mm-hmm. So you definitely want to make sure, this is where, that idea of what is the board's role, and the fiscal responsibility or the fiscal health, maintaining the fiscal health, ultimately rests with the board. So you want to be able to ask those questions to make sure you have some control and some say in what you're ultimately responsible for. Okay? And so then the other questions around that too are to the same, like how is information presented? How often is that presented? So that you too, as a board member, are kept in the loop and are aware and are able to make those decisions. Go ahead.
I'll chime in.
Please.
So I was on the board of the Greater Springfield Senior Services, and I thought that was a great opportunity, a great organization helping seniors. But they, at one point, they used to give us the financial information and the whole packet, like 20 or 30 pages, to read a few days before, and then they stopped doing that and they started giving it to us the day of. And I'm like, guys, this is like 20 pages of stuff. I actually want to read this stuff.
Yeah.
So I was like the only one, I think, that spoke up and asked for, can we have this a couple of days in advance? And then they started doing that again.
Great. Very good.
It was awkward to speak up, but on the other hand, I'm like thinking like what you just said, that we're signing up on these things and we need time to look at them.
Yeah.
But everybody else was just like, yes, 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 rubber stamp, agreeing to everything.
Yeah.
It just, I wanted to be on something more youth oriented, so that's why I resigned from that one.
Yeah. I'm glad you used that phrase, rubber stamped, because that is very much a role that boards can so easily fall into as they get into their own routines and their own rhythms. And so kudos to you for holding them accountable to really step and move into it. But it's a very hard, so we run through these questions and we're telling you, ideally, these are all the things you want to ask, but there's no sugarcoating this. There are a lot of boards in our region right now that are very much they're in their own rhythm, and they definitely can use some reminder of, this is our role, we can be doing this slightly different, or we need to update things, and that is just part of growth. And so it's that nice reminder to people. So in addition to how you maybe are going to evaluate what boards you want to join, these are also great questions if you currently are on a board, to do your own reset and to be thinking about, okay, are we doing these things? Are we doing this evaluation? I just the other day, and then I want to hear your story because it looks like it's a good one. I was just talking to somebody who's a board chair, and he's the CEO, and he's talking to his board chair, and they were complaining about, or the board chair is complaining about, well, we have this one board member, we need to get them the material a week in advance, because if we give it to them at the board meeting, they're going to have a gazillion questions. And the CEO finally said, well, you know what? I'm going to set time with that person a week before the board meeting. I'm going to send the information out to everybody, made the change on his own, just decided to do that, and then does set time with the board member and lets the board member ask.
Actually reads the stuff.
But he and I had a conversation about it, and I'm like, isn't that funny? How on one hand, we are always vetting about, I wish the board was so involved, I just wish they would get more engaged. Yet the minute you get one who is engaged, you're like, oh my gosh, what a pain in the butt that person was asking all those questions. And it's like, we've got to kind of like open up. The reality is they need to be engaged, and you need to then be providing the right communication and feedback loop so that people have the information they need to make the decisions that they're ultimately responsible for. And I have a great slide in here in a minute that I'm going to show you. I think that can help with that, but ask to see financials.
So, piggybacking on that, asking to see financials, you have to also understand the financials. You have to be able to understand the financials, not just look at them and say, oh, okay, yeah, look, there's a profit, oh, and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You have to really understand what all the numbers mean, income statement, balance sheet,
Right.
all the pieces that go together.
Yeah.
Or you're not going to be able to make the sound decisions.
Yeah. And so if that's something that you as a board member need, or if you're recruiting board members and you see that they don't have that, it's something to reach out and think about providing. Is during the onboarding process, there could be maybe you block out a session on how to read the financials, so that they do know. You could bring in a neutral party so it doesn't even feel that it's swayed in any way, but here's how you read a financial statement. And if it's something, I think we should probably have a survey here, but that's something that probably could be part of the series of just, a half-hour session of just how to read a financial, or an hour session, whatever it might be, because it is an incredibly valuable tool to have, so you do know what questions to ask. That is a huge red flag too, when you looking at these pieces. If you are thinking about joining a board, one of the red flags is if you observe that there are decisions being made by only a small group of people, and it can happen it's common that it can happen through maybe a committee structure where suddenly it's only the finance committee maybe who do read the financials and are very entrenched in those, and are suddenly really leading a lot of the decision making at the board, almost it almost feels like their own clique. And things are then getting rubber stamped because the finance committee recommended, and there's not a whole lot of discussion. That can be a red flag to think about in terms of what the communication truly is on the board and how responsibility is divided up. So it's something to keep your eye on.
We created a new board member orientation pack board meeting rules, like
Mhm.
Robert's Rules of Order that we follow and how we follow it, and meeting etiquette, those kinds of
Which
things.
board is that?
Viability.
That's great. That would be a nice kind of sample to kind of look at, and kind of information sharing with other boards. So that could be something else that could be made available, or that, maybe United Way could offer to look at information sharing, best practices in board development. That would be great. So in addition to kind of knowing the organization itself and asking those types of questions to really get to know infrastructure, you want to know who the people are and really how they work as well to make sure that it's a fit. So not only the organization's internal piece, but the board itself. Who else is on that board? Those are great pieces that could be valuable to you. You want to be able to talk about their infrastructure, this idea of committees. How do the committees, not only do they exist, do they have active charges to their working? How often do they meet? How does that fit into a bigger structure? You also want to make sure that the board has D&O coverage as well as a conflict of interest policy. And why would that be important? Have you had any experience with D&O? Needing D&O protection, directors and officers protection. This is very important.
My broker dealer told me if anything happens, you're not protecting me. I remember that. So that concerned me, which is why I was more like, hey, can we have this like stuff
Yeah,
and look at it first?
yeah.
Right, you're responsible, you're as a board member, you're responsible.
So,
To a certain degree.
Yeah.
to a degree, yeah. There's a group I had worked with at one point, very small nonprofit. They had a tremendous turnover at their board level to the point that pretty much every board member was they had no continuity. They had started with a brand new board suddenly. And every single member of their board, this was their first board experience. And so we did some training, just of what needs to be a board member. 6 months later, I get a call from the board president saying, I just got a call from the ED who tells me they can't make payroll. And she wants the board to pitch in. She can't ask us to do that. I said, well, yes, she can. This is exactly your responsibility. I mean, you are fiscally, this is your responsibility. So this is one area where a lot of questions should have been asked at the beginning. However, there is some D&O protection for the board to not be the board really doesn't need to be shelling out hundreds of thousands of dollars to cover payroll for the next 6 months, and there is some insurance available. But my question to him at that point was, well, you have D&O insurance, don't you? Well, I don't know. I don't know what that is. No one told me that this was going to be.
The company or the board should have that.
The
Not the individual
organization,
members, but
the organization should be carrying D&O insurance for their board.
That's good to know.
Yep, you want to do that. Similarly, you want to have a conflict of interest policy.
Sign it every year.
Good. Yes. And make sure that it is something that you are renewing annually.
And again, it should get included in the audited financials.
They will be asked for. Yes. So, okay. You are also ultimately responsible as the board for the executive director. They're your only employee. And so to that degree, you want to be aware walking in, how are we evaluating the ED and their work? How are we holding them accountable to their function? When you think about the organization and how that is, how you operate, it really is between, the organization is run with the board being the governance and the executive director being the kind of the management or the operations. And together, they're able to push the organization forward. That being said, they have very distinct lanes that they're in. And if the communication isn't fine-tuned, they can easily get into each other's way. And they can be duplicating efforts. It can become contentious if there's some micromanagement happening. This piece here, though, and I think this is one of the better handouts I've ever, this is from BoardSource. This really is a valuable piece because it starts to look at various functions within the organization and clearly defines where the board in a governance responsibility is operating, where the ED or the CEO is operating from an operational standpoint, and then where they have to come together and work. So it's really clear how they are supporting one another. And the ED is really your only employee. The ED, the other staff, are the resources to the executive director.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you put them there, to help manage that group.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a two-page piece, but it really does start to, we'll take an easy one, fundraising, for example, where from a governance standpoint, the board would be focusing on how to get the board itself involved and participating in the resource development. Again, doing more of that oversight of planning for fundraising, soliciting their own network of friends and coworkers and family and other board members. The executive director, however, is actually implementing the plan, is managing the staff who are part of implementing that plan. And it's only in the very middle piece here where they come together and they talk about strategy. So if everybody does their part, when you do come together, you're able to move forward much more cleanly and to go much
It's
further.
interesting. It's the same way our government's supposed to work.
Right.
Congress makes it.
Imagine.
The president's supposed to implement the
Yeah.
laws. It's not the king who makes his own laws.
Yeah. This is another place where I find this interesting. We can just think about board meetings themselves. Again, the board meeting is the board's meeting. And I've been in organizations where both ways, where it's strictly a board meeting and the ED will be invited to come. I've been in other ones where it's pretty much the ED and the staff run the meeting and the
Yeah.
board just come and they listen.
That's how you do it.
But it's not the staff's meeting. It's not an operational meeting. It is
Yeah.
truly the board's meeting. And so here again is the board leads and they facilitate their own meetings. The executive side, they can attend, they can help out in providing resources that you need. But it is together, the ED and the board can create that agenda and what that looks like. Outside of that, there's really, so many times I'm in with groups and they're like, well, but the staff really need to be there. I'm like, it's not personal. No, it's not. They don't need to be there because it's not their meeting. It truly is, this is where the board has to have the space to govern and have those conversations. So,
And many boards do have an executive committee that meets
Right
with
before.
the ED maybe quarterly.
yeah. If and that's another piece, is to think about the functions of your different committees. Based on the size of an organization, the board may have a very robust committee structure. And they have an executive committee that has a very defined function. And there's a finance committee and a development committee and some programmatic type of committees. There are other organizations that are just so small, they maybe have 2 committees, and that's perfectly fine. And their executive committee is in name only, and they don't meet regularly, and they're truly only there for emergency purposes. When we can't get all 6 board members together, we'll call, half the board, the exec committee together, and they can meet and make a decision. But you don't want to kind of over-empower any one committee, because then you run the risk of them just overpowering and making decisions for the entire board. So that would be another red flag, that when you do look at committee structure, again, back to what are the charges of each committee and how are they producing and communicating back to the whole group. Yeah, I really, really like this. I share this all the time because it's a really valuable piece. A lot of this, though, I think, well, we'll get to the next piece. I was going to say, I think a lot of this also comes down to, in your own research and as you're asking these questions, do ask to, can I come to a board meeting before I join, can I come to a board meeting? And just observe and see for yourself exactly what's going on. And we'll get to that in yet another slide. But part of this the exploration is really understanding what's going to be expected of you as the board member. And we touched on this a little bit in our earlier sessions, but this is where I know in your own thinking about joining the board, you may have thought about how much time do I have available. Well, now you want to ask the organization, what kind of time does this role entail? What would you be expecting from me in terms of, when are the meetings? What time does that take? Committee work, other volunteer piece. Really get a handle on what's the time commitment. Term limits, as we talked about before, are really important. So making sure that you're aware what you are committing to and what is expected. Is there a financial expectation, whether it be an annual contribution to the organization? Is there an annual signature event that you're expected to buy a ticket to or sell tickets to? These are all the pieces that you want to understand. And then really, what is your role as a board member in the fundraising? So many people will say, I'm not a fundraiser, and that's fine. But you can still play a role in fundraising by providing access to new networks. It doesn't mean you need to ask people for money, but you can still advocate for the work of an organization and start to talk to people about the great work that your new favorite agency is doing. And fundraising or people giving is a personal choice no matter what, but you at least want to provide the opportunity. So you can still play a valuable role and never actually ask for a dollar amount. And then I think being very specific. Too many times, and this is something to think about when you go to the onboard event, whether you're there for yourself or represent an organization, specifically what are you looking for a new board member? Are they there for a particular, because they bring a particular skill set or a particular experience? Let's name that so people know exactly what's being expected of them. Again, anytime I'm joined on a board or I'm asked to join a board, people will always say, because you're in fundraising, and so we're expecting you to join our fundraising committee. Like, well, that's really too bad, because I don't want to join your fundraising committee. I do it all day. I'd rather join a programmatic committee or do something else, because that's just not.
Yeah.
But, so, make sure that that's really, really clear as you go in so that you can meet those expectations on both sides. Okay? So as we talked about earlier, you can learn a lot more from the organization. You can learn as much from the organization, not just by asking these questions, but there's a lot of documentation that can tell you another part of the story. And it is absolutely appropriate. I don't want to say you have the right to this information, because that sounds wrong. You are absolutely in the right to ask to see all this information. And it is absolutely appropriate for you to have this if you are being considered for a board position. So by all means, you want to see the bylaws. Why? What would you be looking for?
What your responsibility is.
Yeah, make sure they have them. And because yes, it does, that is pretty much the manual of how we will run this nonprofit. So you do want to be able to look through that. Annual report clearly gives you a sense of their impact in the community. Or I think even more importantly, what they view or they perceive as their impact in the community is very important. Financial reports, as we talked about a little bit already, are very important. They do tell you a whole nother story, and it lets you just delve in and get more nitty-gritty.
We ask potential board members to come spend a morning, a few hours, and tour a few of our programs.
Yeah. Absolutely. You want to see it for yourself. I agree. Strategic plan, this is another great piece to look at. It gives you a great sense of, well, A, that they have one, but how they are viewing the future, and where they see the organization headed, and really helps you define, do you agree with that vision, first and foremost, and is that something you want to be a part of? But it also then lets you know what you are valued on a financial side. Are we capable? Do we have the means in order to meet this vision? So you need really those two pieces together, I think, to evaluate what's going on. And then, as Charlene just said, you definitely want to see the place in action for yourself. And I think this is really where you can ask all the questions in the world, but there's something about actually being in the room, being in the space, feeling the vibe of the room to know this is somewhere that you want to be spending your time. So it is, meet with the executive director, ask if that's a possibility, attend a board meeting if you can, tour the facilities, tour a program, give some other volunteer time to the organization to see that it's something that does match with what you are interested in doing. And then, of course, meet other board members. This is essentially a job interview. And just as you would be vetting out any potential employer, you want to be vetting out this organization to the same degree. So where you can meet other board members and kind of get a reference check on the board, it speaks volumes.
But also the board vets you.
Right. Right.
We actually take vote on prospective members.
That's a great question to ask of what is the onboarding process in terms of, what else is going to be made available. So you decide you want to do this, you've gone through all these steps. Hopefully you're joining by ability because they've got a program in place to onboard you with everything. But just ask, what is available? What does that look like? Is there, a lot of boards now bring on a buddy system where you actually are assigned and paired up with someone to help you along for the first year or so, that as you have, because there's only so much you can train someone in a single setting, and some of joining the board and learning the board is going to be over time. So if you had this one buddy, as you work through a few board meetings, you can be, at least there's one person you're always going back to ask, well, how does this work, or what does this mean, or that type of thing, and it just builds up some